This second episode in a series of videos on an Inspector Calls looks at the play's structure and its effect on the audience. At first it can appear quite confusing, but once understood it opens up a number of interesting theories about the play's possible meanings. This video will focus on the order of the main events in the play across its 3 acts, the structural features and points you could make about the order and timing of when things happen. We'll also look at the order of events in the real world. An Inspector Calls has often been labelled a time play. We'll look at why this is the case, which will lead us on to finishing with some theories and interpretations about what it all means. So, the order of the events in the play. I'm going to talk you through the play's major events in the hope that it's helpful to have them all on one page. You should avoid retelling the plot in an exam answer though. At the start of the play, the Burlings and Gerald are in the middle of a celebration in honour of Sheila and Gerald's engagement. Burling is full of himself and makes several comments which will turn out to be historically inaccurate, such as the Titanic being unsinkable and the fact that Sheila and Gerald were marrying at a very good time. They're not. War will break out in a couple of years. Burling then makes a speech on pages 9 to 10 which lectures the youngsters about how it's important to look after yourself and your family. This is a capitalist idea, and this is when the doorbell rings, interrupting him in mid-sentence. This announces the arrival of the inspector, who proceeds to tell the family he's investigating a suicide. Despite Burling's attempts to intimidate him, the inspector interrogates all 5 of the main characters. During Burling's interrogation, we learn he sacked Eva Smith from his works for asking for a pay rise. This shows workers had no rights, and he was uncaring of what happened to her. Burling refuses to accept his actions contributed to Eva's desperation. Sheila's interrogation is next, and the audience discovers she had her sacked from Millwood's department store for being impudent and smiling when Sheila was trying on clothes. Sheila reacts differently to her father and is shocked and ashamed to learn she may have contributed to Eva's death. At the end of Act 1 is a cliffhanger, as the inspector reveals the girl changed her name to one Gerald recognises. His affair is revealed to Sheila, and with perfect timing, the act ends with the inspector entering the room and demanding, "Well?" Act 2 opens with the same line, and there follows Gerald's interrogation. The audience learns he set up a girl, now called Daisy, in a flat, gave her money out of sympathy, but then had a relationship with her for some time. Eventually he abandoned her as it became clear he'd be marrying Sheila instead. This signals the end of their engagement, and Sheila gives him back the ring. Gerald is ashamed of what he's done and at least seems to feel some degree of guilt for his treatment of Eva and his dishonesty to Sheila. He undermines this later in the play, however. At this point, Gerald goes for a walk, saying he needs to clear his head. This is very significant because he discovers something while he's out. Meanwhile, the inspector interrogates Mrs. Burling, and we learn she was the last person to have contact with Eva Daisy. She denied her appeal for help from Mrs. Burling's charity on the ground she insulted her by claiming her name was Burling. This was despite the fact the girl had become pregnant. Act 2 ends with another cliffhanger, as the inspector skillfully manipulates Mrs. Burling into saying the father of the child should be held responsible in public. Again, with perfect timing, Eric enters the room and Mrs. Burling realises it's her own son. This sequence is deeply ironic because both Sheila and the audience work out it's Eric long before Mrs. Burling does. At the start of Act 3 is Eric's interrogation, and we learn he had drunkenly forced himself on Eva Daisy and stolen money to pay her off and dumped her. Eric is appalled and takes responsibility for his actions, but both Mr. and Mrs. Burling try to sweep it under the carpet and seem more worried about a possible scandal for their family which would harm their reputation. The inspector's final speech on page 56 should be vital for any exam answer because it contains the message of the play and Priestley's views. The inspector warns the family that everyone must be responsible for everyone else or they face fire, blood and anguish. Here Priestley is referring to the 2 world wars and the potential of nuclear war. Once the inspector leaves, the family argues about who will accept responsibility. There is a clear division between the older Burlings, who still refuse to take any blame, and their children, who are ready to face what they have done and change. For any candidates answering a question on responsibility, this would be an interesting section to draw quotes from. However, Gerald then returns and debunks the inspector, proving he was a fake. He aligns himself with Mr. and Mrs. Burling, and all 3 pretend nothing has happened. The younger Burlings continue to show they have learned from their experience. Finally, the phone rings, and we discover an inspector will be calling to ask them questions about a girl's suicide. This will be the whole family's chance to get it right this time and take collective responsibility for their actions. Let's look at some structural features. The inspector questions the characters in the order he chooses for maximum impact. This isn't in the same order that the characters meet the girl in real life. Gerald's interrogation is in the middle. He neither accepts responsibility or fully denies his guilt, so he's somewhat on the fence. Each act ends with a cliffhanger which is beautifully orchestrated by the inspector. There is the revelation of Gerald's affair, the realisation that Eric is the father of the unborn child, and the sinister ringing of the telephone at the end of the play, and you get the impression that the inspector knew this was going to happen all along. The lighting is different when the inspector is present, harsh and bright like a spotlight. When he is not, the lighting is pink and intimate, as it says on page 1. This suggests that something is different when he is present. They are under a spotlight. being interrogated by someone who they can't control, threaten or intimidate. Here's the order in which events take place in the real world. If we look at this structure, we can see which characters had the biggest impact. Burling starts the process off, and Mrs. Burling ends it, and yet these are the two characters who refuse to take any blame. Both belong to the older generation Priestley blames for the state of society by 1945. Once again, Gerald's contributions land him in the middle of the five characters, showing that he has acted partly out of good intentions, but that in the end he takes little responsibility. An Inspector Calls is often labelled a time play because it seems to manipulate time for dramatic effect. Priestley wrote several works which played around with the idea of time. Something strange seems to be happening when the inspector is in the house. The lighting should be brighter and harder when the inspector arrives according to page 1, and it should change back when he leaves in Act 3, which shows there is significance to his presence. Are the characters in a limbo of some kind, stuck in a time warp? Has the inspector made time stand still? Does it restart again when the inspector leaves, which is why the lighting changes back? The period of time during which the inspector is in the house seems to be some kind of test, affected by a change to the normal passage of time. This begs the question, who or what is the inspector if he's not human? Let's look at some theories and interpretations, of which there are many, to what the play means. Here are a few ideas to get you thinking. The inspector is Priestley's mouthpiece, and through him the writer expresses his opinions about the way society should work. He uses the inspector as a device for his ideology, which means his system of beliefs. The inspector is there to test the characters to see if they will take individual and collective responsibility for either. They need to admit guilt and accept they will change and become better people, or more socialist as Priestley would want. Two of the characters pass the test, Eric and Sheila, who represent the younger generation and Priestley's hopes for a better future. Two of the characters fail, Mr. and Mrs. Burling, who represent the older generation and the ruling class who Priestley blames for the horrible events between 1912 and 45. One character seems to be about to pass, but then ultimately fails. This is Gerald, who debunks the inspector in Act 3, undermining the progress he makes towards taking responsibility. When the phone rings at the end of the play, it's their second chance to get things right and change their ways. Ultimately, it's up to the audience to decide if they succeed, and it's also up to the audience if they will take on board Priestley's warnings as well. Thanks for watching. Please check the channel for more uploads to help you with your English Lit. Bye for now.